What chance did a German woman have in an enemy prison camp, where even the rules were written by men who saw her as both enemy and female? The answer, as history coldly reveals, was almost none. These captured German women found themselves in a nightmare where two strikes stood against them. They had served Hitler's war machine, and they had done so as women, breaking the rules of what society thought women should do. As Nazi Germany sent armies across Europe, thousands of German women went too. The Nazis didn't allow them to carry guns, but they helped the war in other ways. Some fixed wounded soldiers as nurses. Others sent radio messages telling planes where to drop bombs. Many typed secret papers or drew maps for officers. They wore grey uniforms with the eagle and swastika, Nazi Germany's symbol, on their chest. They believed they served their country with honor. None imagined what would happen if they were caught by the enemy. By 1944, the tide of war had turned against Germany. In Russia, in Africa, in Italy, German forces were losing ground. And as they retreated, sometimes these women couldn't escape in time. They became prisoners of war. The fate of these women depended greatly on who captured them. If Soviet soldiers found them, they faced one kind of horror. If American or British troops took them prisoner, they faced another, one that history textbooks conveniently forget to mention. While Soviet brutality is well documented, you'll soon discover the disturbing truth about Western Allied camps, where some women endured violations that haunt them decades later. These liberators maintained a carefully crafted public image, but behind closed doors, power corrupted even those who claimed moral superiority. Nowhere were these women truly safe. And as our story continues, you'll learn how the Allies' treatment of female German prisoners forces us to question the simple good guys versus bad guys narrative we've been taught about World War II. In the frozen fields near Leningrad, Helga Schmidt and 12 other German nurses were captured when Soviet tanks surrounded their field hospital. The Russian soldiers were shocked to find women in German military uniforms. "Look, female fascists," one shouted, using a word for Nazis. These Soviet men had seen their own villages burned by German forces. Many had lost families to Hitler's armies. Their anger was deep, and these women wearing enemy uniforms seemed perfect targets for revenge. Within hours, the women were loaded onto trucks. Their warm coats and boots were taken. They rode for 3 days in open vehicles as the winter wind cut through their thin clothes. The temperature dropped to 40 degrees below zero at night. 2 women died of cold before they reached the first camp. This was just the beginning of their ordeal. The camp near Sverdlovsk held 2,400 German women prisoners behind rows of barbed wire fences and watchtowers with machine guns. They slept in long wooden buildings with no heat except small stoves that burned out by midnight. Each woman had one thin blanket. Their beds were wooden platforms where they slept pressed against each other for warmth. Food came once a day, a bowl of watery soup with cabbage and maybe a small potato, plus 200 grams of black bread so hard it could break teeth. This gave them only 700 calories daily, just 1/3 of what an adult needs to live. Many lost half their body weight in the first months. Their bodies burned up their own muscles just to stay alive. "We work or we die," wrote Ilse Müller in a diary she kept hidden in her shoe. 14 hours each day in the uranium mines. No masks, no gloves. Our hair falls out, our gums bleed. 6 women from my group died last week. Their bodies were left in the snow until spring thaw allows burial. In Western Allied prison camps, German women faced different but equally shocking realities. When American forces captured a group of female signals operators in Tunisia, they sent them to Camp 17 Inches, Algeria. Here, the women received better food, 2,100 calories daily, including bread, meat, twice weekly, and even occasional chocolate. But their treatment wasn't always what official rules promised. At these camps, interrogation became a special kind of torture. They use our fear in ways men wouldn't understand, one woman later testified. They tell us what will happen if we're sent to the Russians instead. How we'll be handled there. The threat of transfer to Soviet custody broke many women's resistance without a single blow being struck. Some camps had worse secrets that wouldn't come to light for decades, treatment that would shock even hardened soldiers. But those stories would be buried deep after the war ended, hidden by governments on all sides who preferred simpler versions of victory. In both Eastern and Western camps, these women made horrifying discoveries. First, they learned that Germany was losing the war badly. Cities they knew, Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, were being bombed into dust. Second, they discovered that much Nazi propaganda had been lies. The Russians weren't primitive subhumans, but capable fighters with massive factories. The Americans weren't the weak, mixed-race army Hitler had described, but well-fed, well-equipped soldiers. Most shocking of all, some began to learn about Nazi death camps through photos or films shown by their captors. They saw the bodies of Jews, Gypsies, and others killed in places like Dachau and Auschwitz. This shook the very foundation of what they had believed they were fighting for. "I recognize places near my hometown in these horrible pictures," one woman wrote later. "How could this happen so close to where ordinary Germans lived? How could we not have known? Or did we choose not to see?" As months passed, life in the camps grew harder. Women died of cold, hunger, and disease. Those who survived faced growing dangers, as some guards began to see them as not just prisoners, but as women without protection. What happened in the darkest corners of these camps would remain unspoken for generations, too shameful for victims to share, too uncomfortable for history books to record. The female prisoners who had entered captivity as proud Germans were changing. Through harsh experience, new knowledge, and painful reflection, they were becoming different people. Their bodies grew thin, their beliefs cracked, and for many, worse trials still lay ahead. Trials that would test not just their will to live, but their very understanding of what it meant to be human. For these captured German women, the war's end would not bring freedom. Many would remain prisoners for years after peace was declared. Some would never return home at all. And what happened to them in those final years of captivity would be perhaps the most shocking chapter of all, in a story history has largely chosen to forget. For German women caught by Soviet forces, prison meant the Gulag, a giant chain of work camps that stretched across Russia from Ukraine all the way to Siberia. In these frozen places, women who had once served as military nurses or radio operators now found themselves working like slaves, far from home and with little hope of escape. At Camp 503 near Sverdlovsk, deep in the Ural Mountains, 2,400 German women prisoners lived in long wooden buildings called barracks. These buildings had thin walls with cracks that let in the bitter wind. At night, temperatures dropped to 30 degrees below zero. Frost formed on the inside walls and on the women's blankets as they slept. Each barracks held 200 women on wooden platforms, packed together like sardines for warmth. Only 2 small stoves provided heat, and the wood to feed them usually ran out by midnight. "We wake in darkness and end in darkness," wrote Maria Weber in a small diary she kept hidden in the lining of her coat. "The guards bang on metal pipes at 5 a.m. We have 10 minutes to dress and line up outside, no matter the weather. Those who move too slowly are beaten with rifle butts or worse." And of course it was a normal procedure to constantly be bumped on the butt, she wrote. The food at Camp 503 barely kept the prisoners alive. Each morning, 1 cup of brown water they called tea. At noon, a bowl of soup made mostly of cabbage and water, with maybe a small potato or a few grains. At night, 200 grams of black bread so hard and sour that many women broke their already weakened teeth trying to eat it. This food added up to only 700 calories a day, just 1/3 of what an adult woman needs to stay healthy. Many prisoners lost 40% of their body weight within months. Their bodies ate their own muscles just to stay alive. The work was brutal and seemed designed to kill slowly, German women, some as young as 19, were forced to work 14-hour days in uranium mines without masks or gloves. Others cut logs in forests where the snow reached their waists. Some built railway lines, laying heavy steel tracks with their bare hands. The work never stopped, even in the worst weather. But something strange happened as these women struggled to survive. They began to see things that shocked them, things that went against everything they had been told about the Soviet Union. In one camp near Moscow, German women prisoners worked in a massive factory that made T-34 tanks, the same Russian tanks that had defeated German forces at Kursk. The factory was huge, modern, and efficient. Each week, it produced 50 tanks, more than entire German factories made in a month by 1944. Ilse Müller, who had worked as a signals operator for the German army, wrote in her smuggled diary, "Today I watched 50 tanks roll out from the factory where we make parts, each one better than the last. Goebbels told us Russians were primitive, barely human, yet here they build war machines that crushed our armies. How could we have believed we would win against this?" The German women saw other surprising things too. Many Soviet camps were run by women, female commanders, engineers, and doctors who gave orders and made decisions. This shocked the German prisoners, who came from a Nazi system where women were told their place was in the kitchen or the nursery. Here were Russian women with real power, something few German women had been allowed under Hitler. "The camp doctor is a woman my age, maybe 30, wrote Erika Hoffman. She studied at Moscow University. When I told her I wanted to be a doctor too, but wasn't permitted, she looked at me with pity and said, 'In Russia, women have been doctors for decades. Your Germany sounds primitive, not us.'" But life in Soviet camps held darker horrors too. As the war turned more clearly against Germany, some camp guards took their revenge in ways that left lasting scars. Nights became a time of terror in many camps. Selected women would be taken from barracks for special questioning. What happened in those rooms has remained mostly unspoken for decades, too painful for survivors to share, too shameful for official histories to record. The pretty ones disappeared first. One survivor had said to researchers in the 1990 seconds, breaking 50 years of silence. Some came back changed, empty-eyed. Others never returned at all. We learned to make ourselves look dirty, to hide any beauty that remained after months of starvation. In some camps, women faced an impossible choice: submit to certain guards or be sent to the deadliest work assignments where few survived more than weeks. Their bodies, once their own, became another front in a war that showed no mercy to those caught in its machinery. Not all Soviet camps were the same. Some had commanders who followed rules and prevented the worst abuses. Others operated like private kingdoms, where anything could happen behind closed doors. The women learned quickly which camps to fear most. Knowledge passed in whispers between prisoners being transferred. As 1944 turned to 1945, conditions in many camps grew worse. German armies were retreating on all fronts. Hitler's promised victory had turned to certain defeat. News of Russian advances reached the camps, bringing a new wave of fear to the German women prisoners. Many worried what would happen when the war finally ended. Would they ever be allowed to go home, or would vengeance keep them in these frozen camps forever? In Western Allied camps, German women faced different discoveries. Those held by American and British forces found themselves in places with surprising comforts, at least compared to Soviet camps. At Camp 222 near Southampton, England, 800 German women prisoners received daily meals that added up to 2,100 calories, 3 times what their countrywomen in Russian camps got. They had weekly meat, milk, and even occasional chocolate from American supplies. Erika Weinman, who had been a nurse with the German army, wrote in a letter later found in military archives, "The Americans throw away food we would have treasured in Berlin. Yesterday, I watched a guard toss half a sandwich into the trash. In Germany, people would fight over those scraps. This abundance shocked women who had been told that Britain and America were starving under German U-boat attacks. How could these enemies have so much when Germany had so little? The question planted seeds of doubt about other Nazi claims. But Western Allied camps had their own dark sides too. The comfortable barracks and better food hid other dangers that would remain mostly hidden in official reports. While Soviet camps used open brutality, Western camp systems sometimes used more hidden methods of control, methods that left no visible marks but caused lasting damage. The German women in these camps were caught between worlds, no longer protected by their country, not yet ready to admit Germany's defeat, and facing dangers from all sides. What they discovered in these places would change them forever, forcing them to question everything they once believed about the war, their country, and even themselves. And for many, unfortunately, the worst revelations were yet to come. For German women held by American and British forces, captivity brought a complex reality far from the sanitized version history often presents. In Camp 222, near Southampton, England, 800 female German prisoners received better rations than their counterparts in Soviet camps. 2,100 calories daily compared to just 700 calories in the East. This relative comfort created a facade that masked darker truths. Western Allied camps operated under a carefully constructed public image. Official Red Cross visits showcased clean barracks and proper food. Cameras captured smiling prisoners receiving packages. Yet these staged presentations concealed the shadowy reality that emerged after inspection teams departed and night fell over the compounds. By 1944, a troubling pattern had developed in certain Western camps holding female German prisoners. Military records, declassified decades later, revealed systematic exploitation that commanders either ignored or actively concealed. In sectors where oversight was minimal, female prisoners found themselves vulnerable to a different kind of punishment, one rarely acknowledged in post-war histories. Remote barracks at several American-run facilities became sites of recurring abuse. Guards selected younger women for special assignments, cleaning officers' quarters, often during evening hours. Those who refused faced transfer to harsher camps or loss of rations. The power imbalance created conditions where resistance became nearly impossible. Unlike the Soviet camps where brutality happened in the open, Western abuses occurred in calculated privacy, leaving little evidence beyond the psychological trauma that survivors carried for decades. British intelligence units developed particularly troubling interrogation methods for female prisoners considered to have valuable information. Sleep deprivation, isolation, and psychological manipulation became standard practice. Women were held in solitary confinement for weeks, subjected to constant bright lights and disorienting noise. Some were falsely told their families had died in bombing raids to break their emotional resistance. The most disturbing aspects of Western captivity remained largely undocumented by design. Official reports used euphemisms like special handling or enhanced questioning to obscure what actually happened. Military authorities maintained plausible deniability while allowing certain officers wide latitude in their treatment of female prisoners. Complaints disappeared into classified files, witnesses were transferred to distant camps, and victims learned that silence was safer than seeking justice. Medical experimentation represented another dark chapter. At a facility near Frankfurt, German women with nursing training became unwitting test subjects for experimental antibiotic treatments. Without proper consent, 23 women received early-stage drugs that caused severe reactions in many and contributed to the deaths of 3 prisoners. Their medical files listed pneumonia complications as the cause of death. The program remained classified until the 1992, and families never learned the truth about how their daughters, sisters, and mothers died. The camp system itself created a hierarchy of survival, where women often faced impossible choices: Those who cooperated with guards or formed relationships with officers received better treatment, extra food, and protection from harsher conditions. This deliberate system of incentives and punishments created division among prisoners and ensured that many would remain silent about their experiences after the war. As 1945 progressed, camp authorities began showing newsreels of liberated concentration camps to German prisoners. This exposure to Nazi atrocities wasn't just educational, it served as a psychological weapon that reinforced the prisoners' powerlessness. After viewing evidence of German crimes, women who might have considered reporting their own mistreatment now remained silent, believing they deserved whatever happened to them or that no one would care about their suffering given the larger context of the war. The calculated nature of Western exploitation differed from Soviet brutality in its sophistication and deniability. While Soviet camps operated through obvious force, Western facilities maintained proper appearances while allowing abuses to continue in the shadows. Camp commanders understood that history would be written by the victors, and few would question the treatment of women who had served what the world now recognized as an evil regime. For women who had been loyal Nazi Party members, this experience created a profound confusion. The enemy they had been taught to hate sometimes showed humanity through decent food and medical care. Yet this same enemy could exploit, manipulate, and violate with impunity. This contradiction shattered their worldview more thoroughly than simple cruelty might have. Education programs in Western camps took on a different meaning in this context. German women attended mandatory classes on democracy, read previously banned books, and learned about concepts like equal rights. Yet these lessons in freedom occurred within a system where they had none. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on the prisoners, who recognized the gap between Allied ideals and actual practices. By the war's end, the German women in Western captivity had undergone a complex transformation. Their understanding of good and evil had been completely upended. The Nazi regime they had served had committed unimaginable horrors, yet their liberators had shown that power corrupts regardless of which flag it serves. This uncomfortable truth that no side held a monopoly on virtue or vice would remain largely unacknowledged in post-war narratives that preferred simpler stories of heroes and villains. The experiences of these women challenge our sanitized understanding of World War II. Their testimony reveals that victorious nations, while stopping Nazi atrocities, often failed to uphold the very principles of human dignity they claimed to be fighting for. This more complex history reminds us that war corrodes moral boundaries on all sides, and the full truth includes chapters that no nation eagerly adds to its official story. Between 1947 and 1956, the German women who survived prison camps slowly made their way home. While male German prisoners often stayed in camps until 1949 or later, some women were sent back earlier through Red Cross exchanges. Others had to wait years after the war ended. Some never made it home at all, having died in the harsh conditions of captivity. Those who did return stepped into a Germany they barely recognized. The country had been cut into 4 pieces, controlled by American, British, French, and Soviet armies. Later, these pieces would become 2 separate countries, West Germany and East Germany. The proud nation they had left was gone. In its place was a land of ruins and hunger. Helene Fischer returned to her hometown of Dresden in 1948 after 3 years in a Soviet labor camp. "I couldn't find my street," she later wrote. "Everything was just piles of broken bricks. The beautiful buildings I remembered were gone. Out of 20 houses on my old block, only 2 walls of one house still stood. My family's apartment building was dust. I found my mother living in a basement with a sheet of metal for a roof." Cities across Germany lay shattered from Allied bombing. In some places, 80% of buildings had been destroyed. Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, once grand cities, were now fields of rubble where people dug paths between broken walls. Women returning from captivity found families living in cellars or patched together rooms among the wreckage. Food was scarce in this broken Germany. People stood in long lines for small amounts of bread, potatoes, or thin soup from public kitchens. The official ration in many areas was just 1,000 calories per day, half what most adults need. Many Germans looked thin and tired, with patched clothes and worn-out shoes. For women returning from Western Allied camps, this reality was a harsh change. Many had received better food as prisoners than their families now had as free people. Some even found themselves missing the regular meals and safe shelter of the camps compared to the chaos and hunger of bombed Germany. But their homecoming brought another painful surprise: silence. When they tried to talk about what had happened to them in captivity, no one wanted to listen. Germany was trying to forget the war and move forward. Stories of defeat and suffering didn't fit the new mood. When I mentioned the uranium mines in Russia, people changed the subject, said Anna Müller, who returned to West Germany in 1949. When I showed the scars on my back from beatings, relatives looked away. Germany wanted to forget, and we who had lived through the worst were living reminders of things no one wished to remember. This silence was different for men and women. Male soldiers returning from prisoner camps were often treated as heroes who had suffered for Germany. They could speak of their hardships, but women faced suspicion instead of sympathy. How had they survived when so many had died? Had they done shameful things to stay alive? These questions hung in the air, unasked but felt. Greta Hoffmann returned to her village near Munich in 1948 after 2 years in an American camp. The first thing people asked was whether I had been with the Russians, she recalled decades later. When I said no, they seemed relieved. Then they asked nothing more about my time away. It was as if those years had never happened. For women who had been in Soviet camps, the silence was even deeper. Their stories of harsh treatment contradicted the official friendship between East Germany and the Soviet Union. In the communist-controlled East, returning women were often forced to sign papers, promising never to speak about what they had seen or experienced in Russian camps. In West Germany, stories of what some women had endured in Western Allied camps also remained untold. Tales of exploitation or abuse by American or British guards didn't fit the new alliance between West Germany and these former enemies. Cold War politics required simple stories of good and evil, with no uncomfortable grey areas. Most women chose silence. They buried their memories deep and focused on rebuilding their lives in a shattered country. Many had lost husbands in the war. Others found that boyfriends or fiancés had given them up for dead or married someone else. They faced starting over alone in a country with far fewer men than women after the war's massive casualties. Physical problems followed many home from the camps. Women who had worked in Soviet uranium mines developed strange cancers years later. Others had lasting damage from frostbite, broken bones that had healed poorly, or internal injuries from beatings or assaults. Many aged before their time, their bodies worn out by years of hard labor and poor food. Mental scars ran even deeper. Nightmares haunted their sleep. Sudden noises made them jump. Some couldn't bear small, dark spaces after years in crowded cells. Others struggled to trust anyone in authority. These invisible wounds rarely received treatment or even recognition in post-war Germany. As the years passed and Germany began to rebuild, these women tried to create normal lives. Many married, had children, and found jobs in the growing economies of both East and West Germany. On the surface, they looked like anyone else, but inside, they carried memories of experiences few around them could understand. In 1956, a small group of former women prisoners tried to publish their stories in West Germany. Publishers rejected the books as too political or not what readers want now. When some women tried to form a support group to help each other deal with lasting health problems from the camps, government officials discouraged them. Such a group might complicate Germany's new relationships with its former enemies. Their silence became part of the larger German struggle to deal with the Nazi past. The German word for this is long and hard to say, Vergangenheitsbewältigung. It means coming to terms with the past. But for decades, certain pasts remained off-limits, too uncomfortable for the new Germany to face. Not until the 1982 did historians begin to seriously study what had happened to these women. By then, many had died, taking their stories with them. Others had learned to keep quiet for so long that they couldn't break their silence, even when someone finally wanted to listen. "I told my daughter a little before I died," one woman said in a 1990 interview when she was 80 years old. "She asked why I had never spoken of it before. I said, no one wanted to know. And after a while, I didn't want to remember." The story of German women prisoners forces us to think hard about war, about how we remember history, and about whose suffering gets remembered. These women had been part of a terrible system that caused great harm. Some had supported Nazi ideas willingly, others had just followed orders. All found themselves facing harsh consequences when that system collapsed. Their legacy lives in the questions they raise. How does gender shape what happens to people in war?